I know how frustrating it is when you buy a projector that looks amazing on the Amazon page, only to find the image looks dull in your living room. You've probably spent hours scrolling through glossy photos and spec sheets, wondering if you're about to waste a big chunk of money on something that won't work for your space. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. When I started looking at a 4K home theater projector, the first thing I asked myself was, will this thing actually fill the room the way I picture a cinema, and will it stay bright enough when the sun sneaks in through the blinds? That's the real test for any projector, because the headline numbers -3300 lumens, 4K UHD, lasers sound impressive until you sit in the spot where you'll actually be watching. I spent a weekend setting up the ViewSonic LS7000 in 4K in a medium-sized living room, measured the throw distance, tried a 120-inch screen, and ran a few movies, a game session, and a 3D demo. What I learned is worth sharing before you click Add to Cart. First off, the brightness. 3300 lumens is a sweet spot for rooms that aren't pitch black. In my test space, the curtains were drawn but a little ambient light still slipped in. The image stayed vibrant, the colors didn't wash out, and the whites were crisp enough to make daytime sports feel lively. If you've ever tried a projector with 15002000 lumens in a room with a window, you know the difference. The laser light source also means the projector stays at a consistent brightness level over time, no dimming after a few hundred hours like some lamp-based units. HDR support is another claim that can be a mixed bag. The LS7000 in 4K does read HDR10 metadata and expands the color gamut, so you see a richer teal in the ocean scenes of The Blue Planet and deeper reds in a sunset. The effect is most noticeable on scenes with a lot of contrast. However, the panel's native contrast ratio isn't as high as a dedicated cinema projector, so the deepest blacks still retain a hint of gray. In a darkroom setting, that can be a subtle but noticeable compromise. If you're a cinephile who demands absolute black levels for every noir film, you'll feel that trade-off. For most family movie nights or gaming sessions, the HDR lift still makes the image pop compared to standard dynamic range. The laser source also promises a long lamp life, and the spec sheet says around 20,000 hours. In practice, that translates to years of use without ever having to replace a bulb. I didn't get to test the full lifespan, of course, but the fact that there's no fragile lamp to handle means one less thing to worry about. It also eliminates the occasional lamp failure warnings you see on cheaper models after a few hundred hours. Connectivity is where the LS7000 in 4K feels practical for a typical household. Dual HDMI inputs let you hook up a streaming box and a gaming console simultaneously, and you can switch between them with the remote without unplugging cables. The projector also includes a USB-C port for firmware updates and a 3.5mm audio out, which is handy if you want to feed sound to a soundbar that doesn't support HDMI ARC. I ran a 4K Netflix stream on one HDMI and a PlayStation 5 on the other. Both sources stayed at 4K per 60 Hz without hiccups. The 3D capability works, though you'll need a compatible T-Type 3D glasses set, and the market for 3D movies is pretty thin these days. Still, it's a nice bonus if you have a library of 3D Blu-rays. Now, the real-world setup. The projector is fairly large and weighs about 15 pounds, so you'll need a sturdy shelf or a dedicated ceiling mount. The lens has a modest zoom range and a small amount of vertical lens shift, but it doesn't have the full motorized lens shift you'd find on premium cinema models. In my room, I had to tilt the projector a few degrees and adjust the screen position to get a perfectly rectangular image. That's not a deal breaker, but it does add a few minutes of alignment work. The throw distance for a 120-inch image is around 89 feet, which fits a typical living room layout without having to mount the projector on the ceiling. One hidden trade-off is the fan noise. Laser projectors run cooler than lamp-based ones, but the cooling fan still spins at a noticeable level when the projector is at full brightness. In a quiet home theater, the fan can be heard as a low hum.